Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. Join me today as I paint an Empire Handgunner of Nuln. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Alongside Dwarves, Empire has always been my other love of Warhammer fantasy, and as more and more arcane journals are released, we get to see more and more about the way the Empire might be setting up in the new world, or the new world as we know it. So it got me flicking through my older books and things, the lovely Empire War book and also the Heraldry book. I started to think about what kind of Empire army I want to build in the future. It's tempting to look at Marienburg, as it seems to be the focus of the early lore for Warhammer the Old World, if we take the Arcane Journal for Warriors of Chaos as anything to go by. But I'm really interested in Nuln. It's been a city I've loved the lore of for years, so I thought that maybe I could do an army, but I've always been put off by having a black army. It doesn't look so striking on the table unless you really nail it. And painting black well can just be difficult. I want a nice simple paint scheme that I can replicate over lots and lots of regular troops, and if painting black is something that becomes painful, I'm not sure I'd have the full motivation to keep going. So I spent a bit of time looking at Telebeckland and nice bright yellows and reds, but I thought I need to try this Nuln scheme. I need to try it out. I need to test it. And this video really is me trying out a test scheme and presenting it to you guys as a tutorial as well, for those of you who'd like to follow along. So here's my Empire Handgunner primed black. Now I use something called High Coat Matte Black Spray, which I pick up on Amazon. It ranges from £6.50 to £7.50 depending on the time of the year, and I think it's great, does the job for me, and it's fairly sort of satin. And here is a 2-thin coat triad. I'm removing the black from it, and I'm going to use Death Reaper to start off with, and the idea with the airbrush here to go deliberately just top down, hardly anything from the side at all. And what I'm doing here is just adding a very dark grey zenithal to it, just to really give a little bit of variation to that black, which is going to be really hard to see on the camera, no doubt. And I want this to be a super simple black. Don't want to spend ages doing thin line highlighting. That's the thing that will drive me mad and prove to me that I can't do this as an army without losing my mind. So I'm just going back there with this making sure that I have caught all of the areas where the light would catch. And what you get, you can just see it there, is something that looks like a dark grey, but when we start adding other colours it will just look black again. Now on to Dungeon Stone Grey, which actually is a mid-tone in one of the triads from 2-thin coats. And I'm just picking out a little bit of extra where the light would hit the most here, just on the top of the helmet, which I'm going to paint silver anyway, but on the back and on the shoulders, on the maybe the top of a knee or something like that, and really building some extra tone into it, further making it look grey. But again, once you paint in the other colours, it's amazing how your eye will just see that as black again. You can see if I tilt it there, you can still see the black underneath. And my plan is, as I've already mentioned, not to do any kind of fine edge highlighting on this black. I'm going to shade it. I'm going to rely on the other colours to trick your eye into thinking we've got a nice highlighted black. Here we have Druid Flesh, Paladin Flesh and Bard Skin, again all from the 2-thin coats range. I'm going to be sticking with this paint range for the entire video for a couple of reasons. One, because I really like working in triads, that shade, mid-tone and highlight. I do that even when I'm painting with the contrast paints. People don't realise it quite as much, but I tend to work in minimums of at least 3 colours. Sometimes I'll add an extra highlight on top, but I just want to keep it nice and simple, partly because I want this nice simple scheme that I can replicate again and again when I'm painting large numbers of troops. Another one because it really helps in terms of a video tutorial to keep things nice and simple and easy, and another one because these paints match up to the Citadel range really well. And if you go to the Transatlantic Games website, they've got a lovely conversion chart. So any of these paints I mentioned, you'll be able to go and see what Citadel paint it matches up to, which is really fantastic. So I'm just picking triad at a time and using it for a specific colour. So his boots are using 3 paints. So we literally have a base layer, then we go on with that mid-tone, leaving a little bit of the darker shade in the shadows. So this is traditional layering. Before we move on to that top highlight, when it's just some very, very thin highlights just around the tops of the boot, around the toes, just where the detail on the miniature really stands out. The next triad is Noble Sleep Brown, Dry Rust Brown and Satyr Brown. Again, as mentioned, from the two thin coats range. So we're starting with that base coat, that shade, that darkest layer, and just doing a thin layer all over here, which is the gunpowder pouch, the ammunition pouch and his belt. The coverage is pretty good. I probably did a coat and a half, really. It's called two thin coats, but it does cover quite nicely. And when you're doing multiple layers and you're going back and highlighting, a thin coat sometimes is all you need. Moving into the mid-tone now, and I'm just focusing here more towards the bottom of this ammunition pouch, just to leave it a little bit darker under the lip of the flap, just where there would be a little bit of shadow, focusing on those harder corners where the light would catch more. The detail on the belt is quite rounded, so rather than doing a top and bottom highlight for this second layer, I'm just going right around the middle of it again. I'm just continuing to work with the detail on the miniature, so whether it's using my brush just to drag along the hard edge at the top there, before I just leave a little bit of that darker tone in the shadows. And as we move on to that top colour, the Satyr Brown, is very much similar to an edge highlight here. You can use the edge of the brush while you can, sometimes just a nice little straight line, just moving the miniature so it's most comfortable, that you're less likely to make a mistake and drag the brush somewhere you don't want it. But working with all three colours at the same time on the wet palette here, if I do make a mistake, I can quickly rinse my brush off and almost go back and fix it right away. Now at this stage with those two browns, I was really tempted to go back and reinforce the shadows using a bit of a dark glaze or something, but at this stage I am going to leave it. I'm trying to work out a simple scheme, as I said, and I'll go back and fix that later. Moving on to Gizmo Fir, Manticore Oak and Cerberus Brown. I'm using this lighter wood for the stock on the musket itself for the handgun. So again, just as before, working through those three colours in order. So a nice thin coat first off of the base layer, maybe a half coat back on afterwards just to fill it out a little bit, and then layering in with that mid-tone first, going along the harder edges, picking out the detail as it sticks out, trying to leave that base layer in the flat of the wooden stock. As we get to that top layer, I'm just deliberately making it a little bit more messy, doing a few little dots and dashes and scratches and things just to add a little bit of texture. It's quite a large, flat area, so you could paint in the wood grain, and maybe for a character model is something I'd look to do. Again, I'm still thinking ahead of army painting here and how I can make something look nice, but have that balance between it being repeatable without driving me crazy. And having done those little scratches on the wood, I decided to go back and add a few to the musket pouch, to the ammunition pouch as well, using that same top colour I did before for the browns, not the same I'm using for the musket. Now we have Berserker Red, Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red. I'm going to be using these on this little sash here and the red feather on the top of the helmet. It's a perfect spot colour. You see it used a lot with Nuln, and I'm going to be using it throughout the army. And this is a really, really nice, simple triad. I've been using it for a while, and they're good substitutions for which are very good Citadel Reds, to be honest with you, but because I'm using this range quite a lot, I just like the dropper bottles, and this just works really well. It's a really nice simple recipe for your base, mid-tone and highlight. Much the same as all the other layers, you've got that base layer down, a nice coat, even all over, maybe a coat and a half I felt I needed, not a full 2 coats, and then going in with that mid-tone, covering about 50% of the area that you've painted, leaving some of that darker tone in the shadows. For the feather here, instead of dry brushing, I'm just using the side of my brush here, so I'm only catching along the top of that detail, which really picks out the top ridges of the feather. And with these miniatures for the army, some of my plan is to kind of use a lot of different spot colours. If you look at those pages in the uniform and heraldry guide, some of them may have a green undershirt or a green top or something like that, and I will add in some variety throughout the miniatures, but I'm really trying to nail down that sort of basic black scheme today. As we get to that final top highlight, I really am just focusing on the very edge of the little sash here, just picking out where the light would hit the most. Very much the same thing with the feather, focusing very much on the top where the light hits, of course, but also towards the edge of these larger strands on the feather. Now this little triad here you'll have seen in many videos before if you watch them, and it's Barbarian Brawn, Dwarven Skin and Elven Skin. It's got super good coverage, and the way I layer it up here, I don't think it really needed a second coat to smooth it out at all. For the mid-tone, I'm covering about 70% of the area, so I'm leaving some of the darker flesh, obviously in between the fingers and areas like that, but also towards the tops of the cuffs of the jacket, and of course as we move on to the face, into the areas that are shadowed underneath the brim of the helmet, on the cheekbones and that kind of thing. You can really focus on the nose, and where the detail is higher, it's really straightforward. You are just painting it in the lines, and these miniatures are fairly stark in their design. So the cheekbones stand out, the chin stands out, the edge of the jawbone stands out really well. You can just follow it with your brush. And as we move on to that very top highlight, I'm just picking out the very ends of those areas. So the tip of the nose is the little spot on the sides of the cheekbones, the knuckles on the fingers, the very tips of the one holding the rifle itself, along that top of the right hand as well. Deep purple and gloomy violet from the Vallejo Express colour range. Obviously these aren't too thin coats, and I forgot that when I was talking about that at the beginning of the video. I meant for my regular colours, not the metallics or any glazes I do, and I do like to glaze on my skin recipes at the moment, and this isn't new if you've seen any of my videos before, but I'm using the more purple tone into the dark areas, into the shadows, so into the eyes, underneath the brim of the helmet, around near the cuffs, that kind of thing. Then I use the redder tone around the lips, around the nose, and also across the knuckles of the fingers, and just adds a little bit of variation, a little bit of warmth and coolness in the darker areas, and it just seems to really tie it all in a little bit and just make it a little bit smarter. At this stage, I'm dotting in the eyes, something I never move my camera in to get a good angle on. I find it really hard to get in a position to paint the eyes on camera anyway, so I tend to leave it out in my tutorials. Apologies. So staying away from the too thin coats paints again, forgetting and using my go-to metallics, so decayed metal and heavy metal. So the decayed metal is a sort of brownish tone, which I like to use as a base tone because it adds some depth and colour. And this is mostly because I don't have many too thin coats of metallics. Again, Translator Games, if you're watching and you want to send me the range of metallics to try and compare, I definitely will. But I really like these Scale 75 Metal and Alchemy range ones. I use them a lot. They're great through my airbrush and with the hairy brush as well. So I definitely recommend them, even if you don't use the rest of the Scale 75 range, which I don't so much anymore, but I do love their metallics. They are very good. So once I've covered all the metallic areas with the base coat of the decayed metal, I'm going back with the black metal now. I might have said heavy metal earlier on, so forgive me. Black metal now, leaving a little bit of that decayed metal showing through just to add to the variation on the tone, so not going too thick here. By leaving a little bit of that browner colour showing through, it makes it look a bit weathered, but it also adds some tone and adds some shadow to it at the same time. Now to make that metallic pop and shine, I'm going to be using some Game Air Silver, and I'm actually using a bit of sponge. This is from Knott's Hobbies. There's a link in my video description if you'd like to get it with 5% off, but it's a sponge tool applicator, and the sponge they send is quite dense. It's really good for doing little highlights like this rather than a chipping effect, and it's really cool, and it means I've got quite a lot of control because I can cut it at right angles. I'm just going along the edge of the barrel here, just adding a little highlight without worrying about shaky hands with my brush, and without it being too thick and sort of a solid line. I don't want that. I want it to be a little bit of variation so that the metal looks realistic. I do use the regular brush as well, just a little bit around the trigger guard, around his belt buckle, the little latch that's on his ammunition pouch, that kind of thing. And for rank and file, he's pretty good, to be honest with you. I could stop at this, it would look great all ranked up, but many of you who watch a lot of my videos will know that I like to use oil washes. You could use an Agrax Third shade for what I'm going to do here. It would work absolutely fine as well. But I'm opting for this light brown, almost sepia toned grease colour from the Soilworks range from Scale 75. I'm just applying it the same way as you would a normal wash like Agrax Earthshade, so I'm really much focusing here just on the metal, but I'm also allowing it to go over the stock of the gun as well. I'm always using a bit like a glaze here to tone down some of those scratch marks and dinks and things that I painted in. The only other area of the model other than the base that I'm using it on is on his boots, on his feet. It's because I'm also using it on the base. I'm painting over the base texture, which you'll have noticed appeared throughout the video. I'm doing it as a bit of a time-saving exercise so it dries, but also over these little rocks, which are just kitty litter as well. And it's kind of one coat all over, ties the boots in. When it dries, it just gives a really nice effect, and it's just super easy. So here we have Griffin Claw, Ivory Tusk and Trooper White. So well and truly back to the two thin coats paints now. And there's just this little bit of undershirt poking through. And it's little things like this that are quite important when you've got a black miniature like this and you really want them to stand out, to break up that black, but also show up the black so it doesn't get lost in one big sea of black. How many times can I say black in a sentence? So I'm just layering up these 3 colours just to show there's a little bit of shirt poking through as he lifts up and leans to fire the gun. So I hinted at doing this earlier on. This is Garagak Sur. I'm just going to use it as a bit of a glaze here just to reinforce this shadow under the lip of the ammunition pouch here, just to darken it down a little bit. It just seemed a little bit too washed out for me, so I really want to go back and really increase the contrast between the light and the dark here. Again, is this something I want to be doing on lots and lots of miniatures? I don't know, but when I was painting one single miniature here, it just became too tempting. And then equally, I probably don't want to be doing it here either, but adding it to the centre of the flat panel of the wood on the side of the musket, again, just really reinforces the higher areas, really makes those highlights pop, and just adds a little bit of shadow. I do like the way it looks. Whether I was doing a unit of 10 of them or looking at a sea of 20 or 30 on my table, whether I'd be so happy doing this, I don't know. It's very easy to get kind of caught in that mindset of painting a single miniature here, but we will see. Now this is Contrast Black Legion. This is going back to the black, which I mentioned at the beginning that I really wanted the black to be simple. I wasn't going to do any highlights. And now I've added all the other colours and done everything else, I can see the balance of how it looks. So I can make it stand out more by going in with these lovely, really handy little seams that are on the clothing. So rather than actually painting in thin edge highlights on the black, which can be time consuming and a nightmare, I can use the detail in the miniature here just to paint in the Black Legion into those seams. And the effect it has is that it really shows off the grey highlights that we've added to the miniature already. So we're almost doing the reverse of edge highlighting. It's so much easier to follow the detail on these seams, add in the shadow there, and I think it just really finishes it off really nicely. Now that that oil paint has dried on the metallics, I just wanted to go back and just tidy it up a little bit, and I'm just taking off where it's pulled a little bit on the top of the helmet. So I'm just making it look lighter again. Now that's the joys of oil paint. You use a bit of Artist White Spirit here. This is AK thinners. I'm just taking it back off with an old brush, just where it's pulled a little bit, and I want to look shiny where the light catches. I'm trying to keep consistent basing across my arm. These might be subtle changes, but I'm using the same methods, and I'm brushing in some pigment here, and I talk about this a lot in videos, but brushing this in dry into the detail and then blowing the excess off. It won't need to be sealed then because it's all in the detail on the miniature, and it'll look absolutely fine. I quite like this dry dusty effect. It's not for everyone, but that is what I'm doing. And I get it over the boots and the bottom, the trousers and things as well, and that also helps with the highlighting of a miniature that's got dark colours because it makes them look dusty and dirty. And the finishing stage is now adding in some tufts and a bit of wet mud effect afterwards, just over the edge of the tufts, so they don't look like they're just kind of stuck on. I can add a little bit around the boots and things as well. Adds extra detail to the miniature. So effects like this can really make a difference on the overall look of the miniature, especially when you've got a very basic paint scheme like this. And as I like to do on all my miniatures, I quite like a black base rim. It's up to you what you do. I'm just a fan of black base rims. I really struggle to paint any other colours. There he is, all done. So a Nuln handgunner with what I think is quite a nice black scheme without doing any of the really detailed finicky highlighting. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. I'm pretty happy with the way that's come out. I think that it's a relatively simple paint job. I can do them in batches of 5 or 10 without losing my mind too much. And with a modern day old world Empire army, it's not like it's quite got the same numbers of infantry that they used to have back in 8th edition. So the units are a little bit smaller. But I think I'm probably going to go with Nuln. I like the way this has come out, and I like to explore that army a little bit. I've always got the option to go back in the future and do all those normal sort of highlights that you see on the black if I so wish to. From certain angles it does look a little bit plainer than others, but from that angle there, when you can see where I've painted in the dark and the seams, I think it does a pretty good job, and that ability to use the airbrush in that way to add those highlights has really helped. If you don't have an airbrush, it's more difficult to get a similar kind of effect. You could do some very, very light dry brushing with a very soft brush and get a similar effect as well. Maybe tone it down with a little bit of a glaze all over with something like Black Legion, and you'll get there, something very, very similar. But the other colours are the things that draw the eye, and if you can break them up and you keep your black neat, you can have a really, really nice effect. But I think it's going to be Nuln based on the way this has come out.
Thank you very much for watching the video. If you are still watching at this stage and you'd like to support me and the channel and help me continue to do what I do and maybe even produce more content, then the links in the channel description below are the best way to do that. There's affiliate links there, the links to the channel sponsor Baron of Dice. So click on that and buy your dice through that way to show them that you've come from me. Really helps. If you'd like to help even more, I have a Patreon. There are 4 tiers, different levels there that will suit different people's needs. And there's also a completely free Discord to join as well, so you can join in on the conversation there. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.
Ah, dear, we're back in Plopsville. Never thought we'd see this place again.
Oh, never mind the rain, Bernard. I think it's probably best to agree we never talk about what happened.
Agreed, dear. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to look at raw sausage again. Anyway, it was nice to meet you there, Kurt. First drink's on you.